Hi, I'm Aide Wright Riggins, and it's my privilege to serve as the Executive Director of the American Baptist Home Mission Societies. And I just want to spend a few minutes today just encouraging you to understand where you're planted in terms of your ministry, and encourage you to know that God is with you as you seek to serve God wherever you are. And I'd like to read a passage that comes out of Genesis, the 28th chapter, and it's a story of Jacob and his meeting God at a certain place. From the 10th verse, we read these words. Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. And taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his bed and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached into heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God, the God of Abraham your father, the God of Isaac, and the land on which you lie I will give to you and to your descendants. And your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south. And you and your descendants shall bless all the families of the earth. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land. And I will not leave you until I have done all of that which I have spoken to you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. A few days ago, my wife and I had an opportunity to have a first-time visit at the house of some friends. And after dinner, I was taking a tour of the house and suddenly discovered that they had a rabbit. And this rabbit was like 8 years old. This family had been taking care of this rabbit when their daughter went off to college. They had given the rabbit to the child when she was young, and then she went off to college, and they were taking care of the rabbit. But they were telling me about what was happening this last Super Bowl. They had invited a whole bunch of friends over to their house on Super Bowl Sunday, had barbecue, and they were getting ready for this lavish feast. And in the process of the doors being opened, they discovered that their rabbit, named Emily, and I'd like to call her Thumper, suddenly disappeared. They instigated a search all over the house, all over the neighborhood, looking for Thumper, trying to find this rabbit. And they could not find the rabbit. And the parents were really upset about it because a few days from then, their daughter was coming home to visit, and they didn't know what they were going to do when she would discover that Thumper was not there. 5 days went by, and in the middle of the night, the wife all of a sudden heard a thump, thump, thump. In the bedroom, the daughter's bedroom, the rabbit had gone in the middle of the night, or during that Super Bowl, had gone under her bed, and for 5 days without food or water was living under the daughter's bed. The rabbit just showed up. I imagine it was kind of like that with Jacob, as he was out there in the middle of that place and space, with God just suddenly showing up. He wakes up, and there God is showing up in that space, saying, Here I am. And then Jacob says, Wow, I didn't know that God could be in this place. Surely, I didn't know it, that God was in this place. Oftentimes when I look at this passage, I wonder, what is it that Jacob really didn't know? I think there were two things he didn't know. First of all, he didn't know that God was in this place. He didn't understand the place. 5 times over the course of these 8 verses, we hear these words, the place, the place, the place. The question that I would raise for you as you're engaged in ministry and in service is, do you know the place where you are? Do you understand the people, the customs, the habits, the condition, the circumstances of the place where you are? Do you know that place? I used to pastor in a large inner city congregation, and The first year I was at this congregation at this church, I took a group of the leaders of the church on a tour of the community. And it was a walking tour of the community. We simply went around each of the blocks surrounding the church. Some of the leaders of that church had been driving to and fro into that church, for over 20 years, but had never been around the corner from the church. They really never understood the place where they were. If we're going to do ministry effectively in the 21st century, we've got to do it contextually. We've got to know the place and the spaces in which we serve. We need to know the demographics of the place, and we need to know just what it is people need. One of the things that the American Baptist Home Mission Society might be helpful to you with is understanding the demographics of your particular community. We have resources here in Valley Forge that are accessible to you to get to know your space and your place. We also have what we call the Missional Church Learning Experience to help equip those of you who really would like to know, how do you get to know your neighbors and how do you get to understand ways in which you might reach out. Another thing that I see in this passage is that God shows up in some of the darndest of places. Here Jacob is coming out of Haran, putting his head down on a rock, falling asleep, and then suddenly God shows up. You know, we have to sometimes be careful of thinking that we actually bring God to circumstances. We have to be careful of thinking that God is not already there ahead of us, because God shows up in some of the darndest of places. A few days ago, I was in Camp Verde, Arizona, and had an opportunity to be at Rainbow Acres. Rainbow Acres is a ranch for 89 developmentally delayed and disabled adults who were there, some for 20 and 30 years, sharing their lives together there on that ranch. A wonderful, wonderful place. I thought I was going to be in a position of bringing God to some of these ranchers, of being the presence of God in their midst as I would seek to encourage them. But as I sat down at table and had bread with 8 of these ranchers the other day, I saw that God was already there. And in fact, rather than me bringing God to them, they brought God to me. We need to understand that oftentimes, like the story that's portrayed in the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, the story of these missionary couples from Georgia that make their way to the Congo, believing that they're going to bring God to these heathen, that oftentimes it is those people that are on the margins, the left out, the least, those that we think are lost, who oftentimes show God to us. Where might those places and spaces be in your own ministry where God is already present and is already showing up? Finally, let me say this to you. God is there, wherever you are. I know that these can be some tremendously challenging times for ministry. Times in which we are wrestling with issues of finances, times in which we perhaps are wrestling with issues of call. But I want to encourage you to celebrate the space and place where you are, rather than endlessly and mindlessly seeking to be somewhere else. I encourage you to know that God is already there. Listen again to these words from Jacob when he woke up and saw that God was there. He said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God and the gate of heaven." I'm going to encourage you to think of the place and space where you are as, in fact, the house of God, the gate of heaven, the place where God is. Make that an awesome space, a place in which you exercise your ministry, and knowing that God has shown up and will show up, for he promises here that he will never leave us or forsake us, and that he will be with us always on our journey. God bless you.